Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the More Right Rudder podcast, the podcast for flight instructors on the go. I'm Sarah Stout, the Program Development Manager here at NAFI, and your host for this podcast. Before we get into this episode, I'd like to take a moment to thank this episode's sponsor, Lightspeed. Now, Lightspeed is offering a unique program with enhanced purchasing options solely to benefit you as the NAFI members. Take advantage of two cost-saving options from Lightspeed, the Trade-Up Program and the CFI Pro Pilot Program. Get up to $600 off one of their superior A&R headsets. Their special offer will allow NAFI CFIs to combine these unique programs into one opportunity for cost savings never offered before. Learn more, visit their site at go.lightspeedaviation.com/NAFI. Once again, that's go.lightspeedaviation.com/NAFI. You can also find this link in the show notes for this podcast, or you can even contact them directly to take advantage of their NAFI member benefit. Call 1-800-332-2421 or email them at support@lightspeedaviation.com. As a quick reminder, listeners to this podcast can also receive a $10 discount on their NAFI membership, whether you are joining for the first time or renewing. Use the code POD, POD49, POD49 at checkout. Also be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast anywhere you get your podcast from, and visit nafinet.org for more details and to join or renew. This episode of More Right Rudder podcast, the podcast for flight instructors on the go. I'm Sarah Stout, the Program Development Manager here at NAFI. Joining us for this episode today is Jason Depew. Jason's a glider instructor who spent several years as a United States Air Force instructor pilot. He's taught in gliders at the USAF Academy during combat missions on 3 continents, and what he claims is the most dangerous of all, at the U.S. Air Force pilot training at Laughlin Air Force Base in Texas. Now he mentors new first officers as a Boeing 737 captain while instructing in the Icon A5, vintage tail draggers, and his Pipistrel Sinus motor glider on the side. Welcome, Jason. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Sarah. It's great to be here.
Great. Well, we're excited to have you. So tell us, how did you get into gliders? Was this your assignment in the Air Force, an interest you asked for?
Initially, it wasn't. I got my private airplane rating in high school and went to the Air Force Academy. They had a flying team that did collegiate competition in Cessna 150s, and I wanted that because those were cool, and the gliders are boring. They don't have any engines. I didn't make the flying team, but I got the chance to fly the gliders, and I was hooked immediately. It was exciting and fun and a completely different kind of flying. There's something magical when you catch a thermal, and you start turning in the thermal, and your airplane starts going up without any motor. It's just a wonderful sensation. So I got hooked from it.
Oh, cool. And so then what led you down the path of becoming a glider instructor?
Yeah, the Air Force Academy, every cadet gets to do the basic training program. It's up to about 15 flights. And if you're good enough to solo, you get to solo. But that program is run by cadet instructors. And so they pick 80 people out of every graduating class to upgrade and become instructor pilots. So I was lucky enough to be picked as one of those. And I got to spend a semester learning to teach, and then about 2.5 years teaching at the academy.
Oh, wow. That's quite a teaching run.
It was.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. So translating that over into the civilian world, most of our members here are airplane or some other form of powered aircraft instructors. And so if they wanted to add glider on to their ratings and get in on some of that fun, what would be their path to do that?
Yeah, it's actually pretty easy. The if you're reading the regulations, so 61109 for private pilots, 61129 for commercial pilots. Um, it's shockingly the requirements. You can add an existing airplane pilot can add a private glider rating with 3 glider hours and 10 solo landings. That's it. For commercial, you can do it in 20 PIC flights, basically solos, and then 10 training flights. And then the requirements for CFI for any rating of 15 hours in category in this case in gliders. So realistically, you could do a commercial rating in a week with a traditional glider or a couple days with a motor glider and get qualified really quickly. And then it's just getting your 15 hours to become a flight instructor, and that's it. Um, Even if you're starting out as a pedestrian and you want to get into flight instructing, it only takes 25 total glider hours and 100 PIC flights to be a commercial pilot. And by the time you've done that, you've probably got your 15 for CFI anyway. So a couple different pathways, but it's really pretty easy to make the transition.
Even if a CFI wanted to add on glider, at the private or commercial level, even if they don't want to go all the way to adding it on to CFI, even earning those lower level certificates would certainly give them some skills that would be useful in their powered aircraft instruction and skills and techniques that they could pass on to their learners. So what would be some examples of things that they could carry forward, even from learning gliders, at that private to commercial level?
Yeah, absolutely. I think every pilot can make themselves better by learning to fly gliders. The first one is kind of just precision and paying attention to what's happening, and you've got to get it right the first time with every landing. There is no go around in an unpowered glider. That's really valuable. You learn to fly with your eyes outside, your hand flying the whole time. For several years, the FAA put a big emphasis on loss of control in flight as a leading cause of accidents. I'm convinced that a big part of that is pilots not being used to looking outside the airplane and doing the basic important stick and rudder stuff, maintaining airspeed, watching angle of attack. And there is no, I love a good G1000 display or a nice Dynon HDX EFIS, right? But it's great to look outside sometimes. So I think that's really valuable. Another one is you learn to fly safe track patterns. In a glider, you always have to be in a safe position to land. And when you look in 91-119, it says for minimum altitudes, if your engine fails, you have to be able to make an emergency landing without undue hazard to people. Um, I do a lot of flight training around Florida, and I see a lot of people flying these really drug-in track patterns. They're a mile from the runway at 100 feet or 200 feet or whatever with the power way up driving in, right? Or they'll just go to 3 or 4 miles out before they turn base. And honestly, I don't think that's particularly safe, and I don't think it's necessary. And maybe people aren't comfortable flying a little bit tighter pattern. Flying a glider makes you real comfortable with it. You got to do it.
Right. And sometimes when you're learning at busy airports, because most of my flight instruction time was at very busy airports where it wasn't unusual to have 5, 6 aircraft in the pattern. So you do have to fly these bigger patterns just kind of as necessity to make room. And yeah, and then when things start getting in close,
Yeah.
that's a whole different sight picture. And I appreciate the technology difference too, because certainly training people to look outside at the time when I was training in gliders, I was primarily flight instructing in G1000 aircraft and doing a lot of instrument work on top of it. So deep in the weeds with the programming, not, the VFR stuff. Yeah, okay, you can plug in the altimeter setting, make sure your radios are set, and more or less get away with it. And, maybe a course if you wanted. And so I was doing all that. And then, I hop into this glider and there's like an altimeter and an airspeed indicator and a piece of string taped to the front. And it's
Best
like, here
instrument
you
ever.
go. Oh, okay. And we were training at a non-towered field. And thankfully, I don't remember the exact runway dimensions, but it was something like 4,000 feet. It was a
Plenty of
pretty
room.
sizable, but still there was a highway off the end of it. So if you didn't get it right. And the Highway Commission had worked with us at some point in the past, this was with a Civil Air Patrol squadron, there was a low flying aircraft sign next to the highway for if we had to approach from the other direction.
That's
It
good.
was trained to look left and right for cars on final. But yeah, you do have to have that level of precision to kind of bring it in every time and maintain that control with just airspeed and that yaw string, which for most
Yeah.
people is just a little bit of craft yarn or some twine or some sort of cording. It's not anything certified or this is the blessed
Right.
form of string for this. So,
But
what maneuvers or techniques specifically do you learn or train for in a glider that could be particularly transferable to powered training? Say, for example, an instructor goes on vacation, they come across a glider, maybe they only have time for 2, 3, 4 lessons.
mhm.
What do you think would be the most valuable for them to try to do?
Well, the basic maneuvers, there's stalls, steep turns, and slow flight, and that's it. And then just takeoffs and landings and slips. So all of those are valuable things to practice. But when you get into the fancy soaring techniques with the good weather out there, whether you're ridge soaring or flying in mountain wave or flying in thermals, you really get to explore the envelope of the aircraft. When you're thermaling, you're basically at your minimum controllable airspeed at maximum possible bank angle in the strongest part of the thermal. And it takes a lot of precision and a lot of practice to be really good at flying right on the edge, right at bank angle and max AOA to try to maximize the lift you're getting. It's really great practice for any pilot. Um, then the other part of it is decision making really is a valuable skill for any pilot. And you
Mm.
really develop a lot of that. When you're in the thermal, you're deciding how to enter the thermal, when to exit the thermal. Are there any other aircraft you need to watch out for? If you're wave soaring or ridge soaring and you run out of lift, you got to decide what to do next. Where am I going to point the aircraft? Where's my nearest suitable landing area? And it's not like in a powered airplane where the flight instructor can pull the power and let the student think about it for a while and add power if you need to. You got to figure it out right away. So you're always thinking, always planning, and always using that good judgment and situational awareness.
Right. So getting the feel for thing and really understanding what the aircraft is going to do as soon
Yeah.
as you make this change or that change, or even the environment around you
Yeah.
changes if you get out of that. Now I was doing this in Eastern North Dakota, so thermals weren't so much and ridges weren't so much a
Maybe the
thing.
height of summer.
I experienced. We might get a little bit of a thermal over a field or something, but certainly not to what it can be experienced in areas with more significant terrain uh, or other options
Yeah.
like that. So if someone wanted to give their hand, try their hand at flying gliders, how would they go about, finding a reputable school or independent instructor? What resources are out there?
Sure. The best resource, there's the Soaring Society of America. It's like the NAFI, the EAA, the AOPA of gliding, of soaring. So just ssa.org, and they have a really good where to fly map on there. It's Google Maps and it's overlaid with all of the soaring operations of the country basically. And you can go on there and get links to every club's website or every operations website, and it has all the fees and the types of aircraft and their availability and everything. That's really the best place to look. And I tell people to try to find something as close as possible. It's tough to get consistent training when you've got to drive 2 or 3 hours or fly a long way somewhere to get to it, right? So if there's something nearby, that's going to be an ideal option for you. And then you got to find one that has a schedule that works with you. A lot of operations are just clubs, which is a good thing. It's really cool, but sometimes they only fly weekends or maybe 1 or 2 weekdays. So you have to find one the schedule works for you. And then just go visit them and take a look at their aircraft and get to know them and maybe do a demo flight and see how they do things. And you can really get a feel for how well trained all the ground crews are and the flight crews and their knowledge level. And you can see the operation and get a feel for how you like it.
Yeah, so that sounds like a great resource. And so for certificated pilots and CFIs who are going to visit, one of these glider clubs, uh, you know, pilots are then, responsible for when it comes time to solo, making sure that that the aircraft is airworthy. Is there anything in particular, powered pilots transitioning should be on the lookout for gliders that are commonly overlooked, or tips that this should be there, that should be there. The logbook probably is going to look a little bit different, may not have an engine logbook.
Yeah, no engine logbook, which is great for pure gliders. With most gliders, it's nice. It's a pretty simple airframe. The flight controls are usually all just push rods and cables. Some of them are fabrics. You want to look at the condition of the fabric. With some gliders, especially racing gliders, but sometimes training gliders will do this too. They're designed so that you take them apart to store them. There's a trailer, and so every day after you're flying, you pull the wings off, slide everything in the trailer, and you can park a dozen trailers in a row where one hangar might have stood. And so the reassembly process is a checklist. So you want to watch and make sure people are following the checklist. And then you can go look at it's just a couple of bolts that go through the wing spar and make sure those are on there with a good nut and a locking mechanism like a cotter pin. And then you want to do what's called a positive control check every time you reassemble an aircraft. So you have somebody actually go out and hold the flight control surface in their hand, and then somebody sits in the aircraft and moves the controls and tells the person holding the control which way the control should move. Right aileron should go up, right aileron should go down, all the way around the aircraft to make sure everything was hooked up correctly and not backwards. That's a very important part of that process. It's in the checklist, but you always do that as a glider pilot.
Yeah, that would be a heck of a surprise.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, control this thing backwards.
Yeah.
Oh, but yeah, I don't even want to try to think about that level of
Right.
surprise. So, say someone goes through all this and they go up and decide want to go all the way to CFI. I'm guessing I didn't read the regulations precisely, but they'd have to get that commercial first, do that check ride, and then move on to the CFI level certificate.
Correct.
So what does a check ride look like when you're adding on, let's just say, a commercial glider certificate?
Basic format is the same. There'll be an oral beforehand, and then the practical in the aircraft. The oral, there isn't too much knowledge. You talk about soaring, weather, and there's some special performance charts, and then the soaring conditions, the thermaling, wave soaring, ridge soaring. All of that's in the FAA's Glider Flying Handbook. It's a free PDF on their website, so it's easy to get a hold of that and be fully studied before you even show up for training. And then the check rides, there's not a whole lot to do, right? You take off. If you're in a pure glider, you'll tow behind the tow plane, and there's a couple maneuvers you can practice on tow. Then once you release from tow, you do a clearing turn, you do stalls, steep turns, and slow flight, and you come back and land. And you'll probably do, usually about 3 flights. On at least one of those flights, the examiner is going to give you an engine failure where if you're flying a motor glider, they'll fail the engine. If you're flying a pure glider, they will pull the release on the tow rope at a time when you're not expecting it. And so then what do? Well, you only have one option. You turn to the airfield and you land. And it's pretty straightforward. It's really cool. It's fun. When we're flying powered aircraft, we talk about the impossible turn. You don't want to ever try to turn back to the airport right after takeoff. In gliders, we actually do practice that turn back as low as 200 feet, which sounds shocking for a powered pilot, but for a capable commercial glider pilot, that is nothing. It's pretty easy. And in my glider, I'll do a 200-foot turn back, and every time I do it, I'm too high, and I have to pull the spoilers open to get myself down to the runway.
Yeah, it's amazing how well these things can fly. I remember the first time I had to do a rope break, and I was just along for the ride to watch it. The first time, thankfully, I was, again, powered airplane pilot. I'm like, we're gonna do what at 200 and 250 feet. So I don't remember. It was probably around that altitude. I say my memory is like saying like 300, but it probably, again, it's been 10, 11 years, so that could be fuzzy. But yeah, I was like, oh my goodness, what did I sign up for here? But it did it. And easily too. And thankfully, I was with a seasoned glider instructor. So they did a really great demonstration, but it was it was a little bit of elevated heart rate to start. But then I got to the point, where I eventually did it on my own and soloed in there. So we've mentioned, kind of casually throughout here, the difference between, or that there are kind of 2 flavors of gliders, like pure or true gliders, and then motor gliders.
Yeah.
So let's talk through what are I mean, besides the obvious motor bit, are there any obvious differences or pros and cons to the different flavors?
Yeah, a pure glider is nice. There's no motor, there's no hydraulic system, barely even an electrical system, no oil system, just nothing to leak, nothing to break, nothing to go wrong, right? It's just a great airframe and it flies. It's cheap to fly. You usually pay for the tow, and then some clubs will charge you by the hour. Some won't even charge you for your flight time. But the amount of flying you get to do is entirely dependent on the conditions and your skill. So if there's good soaring conditions and you're a good pilot, you can go for hours and hours for the cost of a $30 or $40 tow.
Hmm.
So low maintenance cost, low hourly operating cost. It's simple. It's really nice, and there's a lot of really pretty high performance racing gliders available out there on the used market for really great prices, far less than anything you could find in the powered market. So if you want to do some advanced cross country soaring or some racing, it's definitely an option. Um, Drawbacks: in order to do an aero tow, you need a tow plane and a tow rope. You need somebody to fly the tow plane. You need somebody to help ground handle all the equipment and hook up your tow rope for you. You can do it with as few as one tow pilot, one glider pilot, but it helps to have at least one or two ground crew with you. So it can be a production to get one glider into the air. And then either you need a bunch of gliders flying at the same time to make that tow pilot not bored sitting around, or you have somebody that really likes you, or wants to drop off the tow rope and go do some flying in the tow plane on their own. For a motor glider, it's really nice. You just go fly whenever. It's just like an airplane. You just fuel it up, take off, and go, and you don't need all that support. Motor gliders cost quite a bit more, and they're not as common. It's really hard to find instruction in a motor glider, or certainly to rent a motor glider is very difficult. So you're gonna have easier access finding pure gliders, but they're both great ways to go.
Okay, so what makes motor gliders more difficult to come across?
I think it's just not as common. They're more expensive than gliders. Glider pilots aren't out there to be spending, $1 million on a new SR-22T, which is a gorgeous airplane, but that's not what they're there for, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
looking for a $30,000 racing glider that they could, go to the national championships in, but that's really cheap. So, a brand new motor glider might start in the $150,000 range and go all the way up to a half a million for the STEMIs. They're really amazing gliders, but you're getting very expensive, right?
Yeah, I didn't
Um,
realize their price points went up that high.
yeah, they do.
Um,
And then glider wings are big, so it's hard to find a hangar to fit them in. And there's some logistical things like that. So it's just not as common. And unfortunately, glider flying, soaring has not been as popular in the US as it is some places. It's kind of one of
mhm.
my missions in life is to make it a little more popular. That's why we're here today. I think it's a great way to get into flying and a great way to enjoy it.
Great. And that's great because the last thing on our list here to talk about was kind of that social side. You've brought up the popularity, you've brought up racing,
Yeah.
and you shared some other information before we got started. So let's get into that. Like, what are some of the kind of like fun and social opportunities or competitive opportunities out there if you go and get your glider add on?
Yeah. One of the most interesting things about soaring is because you need all that crew, the tow pilots and the ground crew and everybody to help make it happen. Most glider operations are organized as clubs. And you'll have lots of members, and they usually fly all weekend. So Saturday and Sunday, everybody comes out in the morning and works together and gets everything ready to go. And then all day you have this operation going, and the students might do their flight training in the morning with their flight instructors. And then once the thermals start kicking off around noon, the students stop training and they become the ground crews for the pilots who have the nice fancy cross country gliders, and they'll help launch and recover all those gliders throughout the day while they work in a couple more lessons. But you also get families that come out and people just hang out. There's usually a clubhouse almost, every weekend day. There's like a barbecue that evening, and people just hang out and watch gliders fly and have a great time. It's a really special environment. And in aviation, we talk about, keeping people interested in it, keeping them involved in it. This is a way to do it. We don't have enough of it on the powered side of flying, and I think soaring is a great that glider club model is a really great model for it.
Yeah, it sounds like it because it's very similar to my experience with gliders. It was a civil air patrol squadron, and so we would it's kind of the same thing: schedule a weekend or maybe a single day on the weekend and go out. So the airport was about 20 miles from where we lived because we operated a non-towered airport outside of the where we lived was a busier class Delta.
Sure.
But it was a whole big thing to go out there and put it together. And usually, we'd bring coolers and have some sort of picnic. And you even learned a lot just being the ground school or
Yeah.
the ground
Ground
crew.
crew. Yeah.
Because we were using a 182 as a tow plane. So they'd come in, do a low pass, drop the rope after they had released the
Mhm.
glider. Someone's got to run out there, get the rope, then get out of the way before the 182 gets back around the pattern. And it was fun to, you could ride in the tow plane and learn some of those operations if you were qualified. And otherwise, it was just kind of fun to hang out and swap stories um, and learn all the different things about it. So it was a really cool opportunity. So we'll hope that some of our listeners are inspired and go out there and get their glider rating, or even just a couple of lessons, and carry those lessons learned and techniques onto their learners, even in powered aircraft.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, Jason, thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge. And if you have anything else, we would certainly like to learn more about gliders in the future.
Thanks, Sarah. It's been a pleasure. I will say that I've been teaching in a motor glider lately, and I have unlimited demand for students. I have more demand than I can possibly meet. So if anybody out there is interested in doing glider instruction, go out there and get qualified. And if you're looking for students, you will find them coming out of the woodwork to fly with you. It's really fun.
Oh, cool. Well, I'm glad to hear that there's that much interest out there, and it's a really cool aspect that people kind of tend to lose sight of.
Mhm.
While you're focused on growing your career in that, don't forget to have fun on the side.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.